So, welcome back to another episode of the Self-Development Tactics podcast. As you can see also in the background, we are once again talking about stress and how stress affects the mind by Andrew Huberman. So as you can see, once again, Stanford University School of Engineering. I still don't get why engineering and what this has to do with engineering. Of course, it is important for everyone, but why uploading it there? Anyway, it is interesting, it is cool, it is great, and I'm looking forward to seeing, actually dealing with stress, because as far as I remember, the first bit was just about stress, what is stress, what are we doing, and so on and so forth, and now it might be about the tools, the tricks, and the things that we all can do, that we all can fucking leverage to have a better life and deal with stress better. So let's see.
You have started to deploy interesting technologies, I think, in pursuit of these ideas of training people to kind of sense their levels of stress or not stress and adjust them. And can you tell us about some of the more kind of avant-garde technologies that you guys are using?
Sure. So my lab, we work on mice, and we do studies on mice, and we try and identify brain areas that are involved in the kind of things that I've been talking about up until now. We also have a human lab. And I should mention that the work that I'm about to describe is done in close collaboration with David Spiegel, who's the Associate Chair of Psychiatry at Stanford, world expert in medical hypnosis.
He hypnotized me once. We can talk about that on another show, but I had a fear of planes that he wiped out with his hypnotism.
Hypnotism gets an interesting and kind of bad rap from the stage hypnosis world of like swinging pendants and things. Yeah. But David has brought the medical hypnosis technology to a whole other level. And it's really interesting because hypnosis invokes the visual system in some very powerful ways and the respiration system. So the work in my lab and the work with David has been focused on a couple things. But
once again, and I'm basically saying this every single fucking time, David Spiegel, Spiegel, as far as I remember, and his app, or by his team, he is playing a huge part in it, Reverie, Reveri, or something, just Reverie. It is available. Once again, I'm a fucking parrot. It is available on iOS, but not on Android yet. There is a list, but as far as I know, it's not. It's being developed, but it is not done yet. So if you're having an Android phone, poor you, and also fucking poor me. But it is about hypnosis, self-hypnosis, which is quite interesting and might be very useful for certain fears that one might be having, like the fear of flying or of planes, whatever. I hope it's not plainly planes. Yeah. I hope it is about flying.
The thing we did about 4 years ago, people in my lab were studying fear and stress in mice. But of course, we could ask the mice what they're feeling, but if they tell us, we don't understand. And they probably don't understand what we're saying. So we shifted to humans. And so we have a lab where people come in, they do virtual reality, which is
like the goggles.
Like the goggles. Very in-depth, what our other colleague, Jeremy Bailenson Communications, has really built up over a decade or more, this idea of creating presence in the VR. People know it's not real when
they also did certain tests via VR on David Goggins, and you might know David Goggins, this guy that is or has been running in the past up until like his bones broke and shit. So he's definitely a tough guy, definitely somebody not to joke around with. But they did tests on him, and I have talked about it before. Andrew Huberman has also been talking about that on certain podcasts. There's not a dedicated one for that, and I do not also think that there is a podcast with David, which would actually be really amazing and really interesting to see. But still, quite an interesting guy, and also trying to figure out why he is the way he is by using VR in terms of fear setting, like giving a person a reason to be feared. For David, apparently it was sharks, and so they did a VR shark thing.
And they put the goggles on. If you come into my lab, you might put on those goggles and swim with great white sharks, or give a public lecture, or be in a claustrophobic environment, or a heights experience. And of course, at first you realize that you're not underwater with sharks, but there's something about the sensory inputs when you start to combine vision and hearing in very robust ways that you get what Jeremy has described as presence, where the nervous system flips into these states where it actually thinks it's in that environment. So we put people into these environments. We do a number of different things. We record from a lot of areas in the body. So we're recording, for instance, I mentioned the eyes are part of the brain, not the body, but we're measuring pupil size changes to measure these changes in autonomic arousal, which is the fastest readout of the stress response that we can get from the periphery. We're looking at things like respiration, heart rate, etc. And so we're trying to get a signature of the stress response. In some people, because we have access to neurosurgery patients, we have people come do this who have electrodes embedded in the fear centers of the brain. So we're getting recordings, what are called local field potentials. So a lot of different action potential activity, electrical activity from neurons in the amygdala, in the insula, in the orbitofrontal cortex, from all over the brain while they're in these equivalent experiences. So we do both kinds of things. And then what we've done is we've found some very robust readouts of the stress response. And we do this in people also, I should mention, that have generalized anxiety versus what we call typicals, although everyone, anxiety and stress, of course, is normal. So what we found, I can just mention a couple highlights that we found, and then I can talk about some of the interventions that we've developed based on those findings. First of all, and this is a manuscript that should soon be out, we found that there's a particular pattern of visual search that people who have generalized anxiety invoke when they're in an environment that they don't understand or that makes
So
them
you
stressed.
literally mean the way their eyeballs are moving around, scanning the environment is different.
That's right. It's more what we call saccades, so more eye movements. That probably doesn't surprise people. But we controlled for this very carefully by putting them in equivalent environments where only a few select experiences were missing. So we can control for things like luminance, and we can control for depth in the environment and these kinds of things you could only do in VR. You couldn't do this in it. I couldn't imagine doing it in any kind of other experiment. It's also based on the velocity of those eye movements. Mm-hmm. So this again just speaks to how closely tied the visual system is to the stress system. And then we've identified particular patterns of breathing associated with the stress response, as well as patterns of breathing that are associated with people's attempt to calm themselves. And that's where it starts to get interesting, because work from...
And I always then wonder whether we can use the stress response, whether we can be stressed like on purpose to get into a state of better learning, better neuroplasticity, better whatever stress might also be useful for. Maybe also, I don't know, just, going through time quicker and or slower, depends. And so on. Like, I always wonder then if we can reverse engineer that and get stressed basically on purpose, as dumb as it may sound, or as strange, since at this point in time I think it is something that we all don't want to have, and we all tend to or would like to not experience that often, but still would be interesting.
Yet another colleague of ours, so blessed, right, to be at Stanford. This work really, I'm not biased towards Stanford in this discussion at all, except for the fact that this work really was done there by not my group, but Mark Krasnow's group in genetics, and it was in collaboration with Jack Feldman at UCLA. They discovered a particular class of neurons in the brainstem that control what are called physiological size. You do these in sleep.
Size, S-I-G-H-S.
S-I-G-H-S. You do these in sleep, and you do these in claustrophobic environments subconsciously. Animals do this before they go down for a nap. And it's a pattern of breathing in which there's 2 inhales followed by an extended exhale. And typically the inhales are through the nose and the exhale is through the mouth.
What I thought about at some point is when we are crying, we're also breathing in a very certain way. It is more like maybe it's just the same thing, but times 100 or some shit. I don't know. Like, it is very interesting also to by knowing that, trying to maybe see certain patterns, or trying to maybe see like behaviors that we're having in certain situations, whether it is indeed crying or being stressed or whatever. Really interesting.
This is not a breathing technique we invented. This is a breathing technique that evolution and Mother Nature invented. And what it does is very interesting. It you have the two big lungs, but you have all these little sacs of air in the lungs, which increases the volume of air that you can bring in. Those sacs collapse over time, and as a result, oxygen levels start to go down and carbon dioxide levels go up in the bloodstream and body. And that is a big part of the signaling of the stress response. In fact, we breathe because carbon dioxide gets too high and neurons sense that carbon dioxide. So what happens is these little sacs deflate. And a physiological side, the double inhale, is like if you've ever been to a party, a kid's birthday party, and you're trying to blow up a balloon, you blow once and it doesn't inflate, you blow twice, and it pops open. Right. And it doesn't explode, but it pops open, and then you can inflate it the rest of the way. So physiological size expand the alveoli of the lungs, allow oxygen back in, and allow you to offload more carbon dioxide in the long side.
That's
people do this. Yeah, it's really cool. And we all do this, and animals do this. Now, humans, there's been a lot of discussion in the last 2,000 years about how to calm the self. There's a lot of interest in meditation and mindfulness practices, which of course always incorporate some breathing. If people do yoga or they go for a run, there's all sorts of activities that we associate with stress relief. One of the things that David Spiegel and I decided to ask was, well, what role are specific patterns of breathing playing in this? And can people export those spontaneous patterns of breathing to deliberate practices that allow them to push back on stress at any point? So
before we get to that, I just want to say that this is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman, and we're going to read Russ Altman. I'm speaking about breathing idea.
Two main features of the attempt to calm oneself response. Let's call it that. And these, again, are features that were built into our neurology and the connections between the brain and the body. Physiological size, that double inhale followed by an extended exhale, done just 1 or 3 times, seems to be nature's way of taking that sympathetic stress response and balancing it with a more parasympathetic, relaxing response. The advice we hear out in the world, take a deep breath. Turns out that's not quite right. It's take 2 breaths, ideally through the nose. And then the just exhale, that's not quite right because the exhale has to follow the 2 deep breaths. So what David Spiegel and I have done is we've set up a very large experiment now, which because of COVID and the situation with the pandemic.
And I always then wonder, what are some other things that we can do or that we are already doing, but maybe not necessarily seeing, that could really help us, feeling better, being more energized, whatever it is. Just certain behaviors, certain ways of moving, acting, doing things, and so on, that is already incorporated into our being, in us quite.
It makes it challenging to bring people to the lab. The timing couldn't have been better. What we did is we knew there was a lot of stress in the world. We partnered with a company that makes, and I should say that they donated, and we didn't partner in a formal sense, but they donated wristbands that measure heart rate variability, respiration, sleep quality, sleep depth, duration, and so forth. And we have now 125 people out there in the world who, on a daily basis, heart rate variability being good, by the way. You don't want your heart rate very high or very low throughout the day. You want variability. A lot of people overlook that. They think, oh, you're supposed to always be 50 beats per minute or something. We can get back to the relationship between breathing and heart rate variability later. But the 4 conditions that we're exploring are, 1, physiological size. The other one is a dedicated 5-minute breath, or you could call it breath work practice, which is called super oxygenated breathing, where people breathe very
Tumu breathing, or the Wim Hof method,
intensely, 25 or 30 deep breaths. You feel agitated, and the reason is it generates the sympathetic response. You're self-inducing the stress response.
Adrenaline, quite. And this is also one of the reasons why using Tumu breathing or Wim Hof breathing or the Wim Hof method, besides the cold exposure, but just the breathing, is also good for killing, I think actually creating killer cells that help you when you're ill or when you're about to get ill or when you're not feeling that great, to basically support your body. As far as I understand and as far as I have kind of put the pieces together at this point.
You say, well, why would you want to do that? Well, it's immediately followed by a long exhale and then sitting as calmly as possible with adrenaline in the body. So it's a mild form of self-stress.
It kind of rings a bell for some athletes right before their event. I mean, I'm imagining people may have discovered this on their own. I think it's possible because you think of these athletes like before a 100-yard dash doing these little.
The reason for looking at those is it's what I call a real-time tool. You know, it's wonderful to have breathwork practices, exercise, meditation, baths, massages, vacations, but we wanted to develop tools that people could use in the moment. Right. And this comes from a well-known feature of psychiatry, which is even for people who have panic attack who are prescribed, Valium or something, they feel great relief by knowing they even have it in their pocket, right? And as well as the ability, you don't want to have to necessarily put yourself into a state, go off and excuse yourself during a stressful event. Sometimes life's happening. So this double inhale exhale was designed as a real-time tool to invoke cushion or anything or lying down. It's about capturing the neural circuits of the brainstem that were designed to induce the parasympathetic calming response. The superoxygenation work was designed by us and by others to explore whether or not people could raise their threshold for what we would call a stress response. So by inducing adrenaline in the body at a low level and self-inducing it, but then remaining calm cognitively, you can potentially get your hands around this feeling that is normally so agitating that it troubles you, that it...
And it is a really interesting feeling that one is having when doing those breathing exercises, this breath work. It's an amazing feeling. I really like it. I don't like the breathing though. It kind of feels really like hard work. And I've seen other videos before that, where the person stated that it was one of the most difficult habits to sustain because, I don't know, maybe just because it is so difficult, at least for me it was really difficult, but the state is very interesting and definitely worth checking out and experiencing on oneself.
You're comfortable there. And again, this comes from a statement that David Spiegel made, which is when it comes to stress and trauma, it's not just about the state that you end up in, it's how you got there and whether or not you had anything to do with it, right? Yeah. When someone else or something else triggers your stress, it's different. So we're exploring that. We're also exploring a pattern of breathing called box breathing, where you inhale for about 3 seconds, hold your breath for about 3 seconds, exhale for about 3 seconds, and then hold your breath after that exhale for about 3 seconds, and then repeat. And it's a very unusual pattern of breathing, one that we almost certainly never do spontaneously, but it increases what's called our carbon dioxide tolerance, which is our ability to tolerate these low oxygen states. It's actually the one that freedivers use.
I was just going to say, the guys holding the boulders underwater do this.
Right. Something I do not recommend, as I have some friends who are expert freedivers, but even they would say there are only 2 ways out of that sport. One is to resurface alive, and the other is to resurface dead. Please don't. But box breathing is something, all these you do on land, not near water. And I should just mention, over time, what we have people do is extend the duration of those inhale holds, exhale holds. And people, freedivers and people who learn carbon dioxide tolerance can, over a series of days, can start to extend those inhales to 8 seconds in, 8 seconds hold, 8-second exhale, 8-second hold. That's actually very challenging. Now, what we're finding, and these findings are preliminary, are that people are seeing great improvements in, and again, preliminary, in depth and quality of sleep, ability to fall and stay asleep, ability to counter stress throughout the day, feelings of control at a subjective level over life in general and their life and their sort of their agency in life. And
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there just for time, but this is unbelievable. Sure.
Just ending the whole thing in the middle of it. That is nice. That's amazing. Good job. No, I think this is actually a really useful video, kind of summarizing or including many of the ideas that Andrew is talking about quite a ton and quite a lot in just 30 minutes. It's amazing. But yeah, with that being said, I'm hopefully going to see the next time. And I really also dearly hope that I've been able to spotlight certain ideas and spotlight certain thoughts that are of use to you and your life and maybe the people around you. But yeah, I'm hopefully going to see you the next time. Bye-bye. Now I have to wait a bit so that the outro is also in. Yeah.